So I got married and I purchased all these things. I had cars, I had homes, and that the more things that I was able to purchase, I thought that it showed everybody else the blessings that I had received from God. One day I lost my job. At this point I couldn't pay for any of the stuff that I had, and now I'm in this massive amount of debt. I can't pay for it because I don't have a job. I ended up losing my wife, my 2 kids, and all of that stemmed out of my selfishness for things. Instead of turning to God and saying, God, I can't handle this situation and I need you to take control. Instead of doing that, I thought, you know what, I can fix this. I got into law enforcement, and the reason I did that is because it was financially stable. It was not necessarily something that I wanted to do. I ended up marrying another woman, my second marriage, but didn't know Jesus. She didn't know God. Come to find out, you know, here I'm working law enforcement, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing is right in law enforcement, and I soon realized that my second wife was a cocaine addict. She began pulling money behind my back, began taking money, began spending money and putting me into further debt. I went from, I've got this, I can fix this, to I'm in so far in debt now that there's no way God can love me. I found out that she had been unfaithful, that she'd been sleeping around quite a bit. You know, this drove me even further down because now I'm not good as a man. At one point, I remember talking to my dad on the phone, and my dad spoke to me and he said, Daniel, get out, you can get out. It's not, this whole relationship is, you can get out of this. So I literally dropped everything. I grabbed what was needed. I loaded it into my Durango at the time is what I was driving, and I drove off. I had a lot of pride. I had a lot of selfishness still holding on to me. It was just all about me. I didn't do anything for my father. I didn't help out around the house. I took it for granted. I would go out on the town in Phoenix to any bars, searching for, you know, anything to make, the very thing that I looked at my second wife and I downed her for, I began looking for because I didn't know where else to turn. I still hadn't looked at God. I still hadn't stopped and gone, God, take this from me, take this situation, take control. I got kicked out of my dad's house, not in a mean way, but he was very nice about it. I'm moving out of my parents' home, and at this point I realized I had nowhere to go. All I had was my Durango, and I had my personal belongings. And so for the next, I believe it was 1.5 to 2 years, I lived out of my Durango. I slept in my Durango. I would park in Walmart parking lots and go inside and get to use their bathroom. This Durango, because I was so far in debt, when I left New Mexico, this Durango was up for repossession. And so I left and ran away with this Durango. The one thing that I was holding on to was my possession. This is the only thing I had left of this life that I had created. Every time I'd see a cop drive by or they'd drive behind me and you'd see them staring at the back of my Durango, and I'd always think, they're gonna take it from me. And I got nothing. I got nothing. They're gonna take it from me. And so I was scared. I didn't know if I'd, get arrested. At this point, I had no hope. I was broken and I had no hope. There was nothing left. I had no money. I had no job. I'm living on the streets. I went from having everything, a family, the cars, the homes, the timeshares, the great career, everything else, to having absolutely nothing except for myself, this Durango I was holding on to, and my laptop. Here I am, I can't do it myself anymore, and I realized that, and I finally came to a point one day where I got scared. A law enforcement officer drove by the back, saw my license plate, pulled back around the front, got out, and came and knocked on my door. I don't remember what I told him, but I know it wasn't true. And that night, I was so scared because I thought, here, the last thing I have my Durango, and I believe it was winter at the time, so it was cold. And I thought, if I don't have this Durango, I'm gonna be living on some corner somewhere. As soon as that law enforcement officer left, and as soon as I had found another place to park for that night, and that was my essentially my come to Jesus moment. Because I remember praying and saying, God, I can't do this. I don't have the finances, I don't have a job. I've tried to get a job, I can't find one. I've lost my family, I have no contact with my kids. Because I had nothing else, I had nowhere else to turn to but Him. There was nowhere else to go. I remember laying there in the Durango one night, and it was after I got done reading, and I had probably prayed for a couple hours, and a knock came on the side of my Durango. I opened up the door, and it was my dad. And my dad said that night God woke him up and said, go get your son. But it wasn't until I reached bottom and I was broken, and the only focus that I had to be God, that God released my father to come get me. And so at that point, I moved back into my father's home. At this point, I'm praying and I'm saying, God, show me what you want me to do. And right when I finished saying that, I'm driving and I look over to the right and I see Family Christian Bookstore. And at that moment, I hear God say, stop. And there was a gentleman behind the counter and happened to be the manager. And I said, listen, I have been looking for a job. At this point, I don't care if it's minimum wage. I don't really care what I have to do. I'll take out trashes for you. I'll sweep. And I started the very next day working at Family Christian. And I stayed faithful to it. And there was a lady that was working there, and I got to talking with her and talking to her about how I would like to be able to make more money so that I could support my kids. Her husband happened to work for a security company. And because I was ex-law enforcement, I was pretty much a shoe-in to this security company. I started attending Pure Heart, started going, loved it. I went and talked to Pastor Brian Bloom and just asked him if I could come, sit in on the praise and worship team. The heart behind their worshiping was like they had gone through problems. They'd had struggles. They'd had, brokenness. They'd had rebellion. They had pride and selfishness and all those things, and yet here they were worshiping in love for this God that I had this warped mindset of who he was and who I was in him. Pure Heart began doing this because it's worth it thing, and I remember the day Pastor Dan announced it in church, and my first thought was, here's just another church asking for money. At that point, truth spoke through. My finances are not mine, they belong to God. And this ministry belongs to God. This church belongs to God. The pastoral staff belongs to God. Everything that they have belongs to God. If everything that I have, God gave me, and this is God's ministry, then does not everything that God gave me belong to his ministry? This whole process of me losing everything was worth it. It was worth it because I found out who I was. I found him. I found what my abilities are in him. I'm just thankful that I'm allowed to stand on the stage after all of it, after my rebellion, after my running from God multiple times. He still allows me to stand on a stage and worship him, to lead others in connecting with him, to help others find who they are in him.